Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Campfire Stories here at Scary Stories We Tell. I am still your host, Christachio, and I am joined, as you can see if you're reading the episode title, by my good friend. You've heard him here many a time. He's been here for quite a while. He stops by once or twice a year to update us with what he's been doing and maybe bring the energy down with some less than positive news. But I think we're going to be talking cryptids this time, not parapolitical stuff. Your friend and mine, writer, man about town, Mr. Rob Skvarla.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing good. You know, better than those flagpoles in Philadelphia are doing, but they're being destroyed intentionally because people are happy, not out of
the
anger.
Padres, yeah. No, the Phillies are going to the World Series, so I'm excited.
Yeah, as a Philadelphia resident, right? There you go. So
yep, I was out last night watching people climb those grease poles. The city did not know what they were doing. They try and stop us, but you can't.
You can't. Once we've made up our minds, there's no stopping us.
Surprised there isn't like a Philadelphia specific cryptid that what they're known for is climbing grease poles.
Right. I was out one night. I was out one night and I just saw him. He was just climbing all these poles and hopping from pole to pole. What is going on? Like Spring Heel Jack, but not, but worse, I guess. I don't know. Better,
I suppose.
I don't know. So speaking of cryptids, the last time you were on, Rob, you had mentioned that you were possibly going to be going to Point Pleasant. And
unfortunately, I didn't make it to Point Pleasant.
But you did go somewhere else.
I did, yes. So, I mean, what I've been trying to do over the past couple of months was go to as many different cryptid festivals as possible. I had initially planned on going by myself to Point Pleasant, West Virginia for the Mothman Festival. But as the date approached and got nearer and nearer, and I was following it online, it became clearer and clearer that it was going to be very crowded. All of the events were quickly being sold out. There was going to be no parking in town itself. It was going to be difficult to get to the event. So I decided not to spend 8 hours in a car driving to an event I might not be able to enjoy.
Sure.
But as luck would have it, Pennsylvania being the weird state that it is, and believe me, it is a very weird state, we had another Bigfoot-themed festival out near York, PA, which is like in the southern part of the state. That was about an hour and a half, 2 hours from me drive time. So I went out there to celebrate the Albert Witch, which is like a little Bigfoot that throws apples.
Okay, lot to unpack there. So, so tell me a little bit about this, because this is a hyper-regional cryptid then, because I've never heard of this cryptid before.
Well, so Pennsylvania has a bunch of regional specific cryptids. I think like if you look up the states with most cryptids, it's usually places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, maybe Washington State, usually places with like a lot of forested areas. On top of that, we have a lot of unusual ones because of a large Pennsylvania Dutch population. That, those Germanic people, when they came here with their folklores in the 1800s, they brought all of these stories along with them that sort of mutated along with interactions with local native populations. So the Albert Witch was one that is either supposedly coming from native culture within Pennsylvania's local indigenous populations, or Pennsylvania Dutch, or possibly some combination thereof.
So what is the deal with the apples?
I'm not fully sure. The Albert Witch
just likes apples.
The Albert Witch likes apples. And if you walk by its tree, because it can also climb trees, Bigfoot being a primate, supposedly, it will throw apples at you. One of the suggestions with the name Albert Witch is a suggestion that it may have come from apple snitch, which Pennsylvania Dutch, it's a phrase, I guess.
Interesting.
So it's just one of many cryptids in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what is said festival about, and what takes place at the Albert Witch Festival?
Well, so one of the things I've noticed, at least going to the Bigfoot festivals in Pennsylvania that I've been to, I went to one out in Western PA earlier this year, which I believe was the Greater Western Pennsylvania Bigfoot Festival. I think that's the name. And then the Albert Witch Festival is that there is a very strong spiritual theme in these Bigfoot festivals. And I don't know if it's just something that's slowly taking over the Bigfoot community. I know there has been, to some extent, like a belief in Bigfoot as a spiritual figure going back to, the 70s and before, when Bigfoot started to become popular. But when you go to these festivals, you'll see a weird mix of people. The one in Western PA was very heavily skewed towards a Trump demographic. You would see lots of Trump memorabilia, Bigfoot memorabilia, and then memorabilia mixing Trump and Bigfoot. So there was that.
That's a lot to unpack. Make Bigfoot again exist? Real? Make
Bigfoot exist again. I'm not sure if that's what they were going for, but you'd see a lot of stuff like Bigfoot holding an AK-47 and so to be fair, there was also a lot of other stuff there.
Sure.
There was the spiritual contingent, sometimes called the woo people, after woo woo. And then there was the primate group, the people who believe Bigfoot is real. They tended to not have perfectly ideological beliefs. Some were probably Trump, some were probably not Trump, but you got like a strange mix of people there. This recent one, the Albert Witch Festival, was less overtly political in the sense that you didn't see anyone openly endorsing any political candidates, but you still had all kinds of strange stuff. And the spiritual aspect of it was even more pronounced. There was a lot of occult vendors, like, modern occult themed stuff, some stuff with Satanism. There was one in particular where it was Pennsylvania Dutch folk healing, also known as powwowing. I forget the official name, but the people who were running that tent ended up, the main guy, Rob Phoenix, ended up having a speech at the end where he went into the spiritual beliefs behind powwowing, which is kind of like it's kind of like Christian folk magic, almost like evangelicalism, where they have some kind of practices like laying hands, but not quite, at least from what I saw, as crazy as evangelicalism, because he seemed at least a little more coherent than many of the people I've encountered in that community.
Like theatrical wise, you mean? That it lacked the theatricality?
In the sense that they seemed very much open to other ideas. So when they were, because there was obviously an occult theme to some of the vendors, they were fine with it. They were like, there's just different types of witchcraft. They acknowledged there's bad witches, but they also said there are good witches. That's not something you would ever hear in like an evangelical congregation.
Yeah. That is not what Amy Gooch is saying about Hocus Pocus 2. There are only bad witches.
Yeah, that you need to play that clip for your audience. If you have not seen it, it's insane.
It is insane, but at the same time, it speaks exactly to what you're talking about, which is a complete and utter disregard for any positivity in witchcraft or magic with a K.
Yeah.
The complete disregard for that seems to be solely put on the shoulders of, I guess, I wouldn't say right-wing Christians, but conservatives, at least conservative Christians or evangelicals.
And I guess there is a contingent of, like a very small contingent of left-wing evangelical people. I encountered some working for a labor union one summer canvassing, but they're very rare.
One time I saw them once.
The powwower I encountered out at this festival, he seemed like much more open-minded than you would expect. And probably because even within the Christian faith, their beliefs are considered probably not mainstream heretical in some sense because they're practicing a form of folk magic, even if it is Christian.
So I guess one of the first questions to you is, what do you think is drawing this group of people to a Bigfoot festival? The
spiritual people?
Yeah.
Well, I think that going back hundreds of years, American religion has never been coherent. Modern evangelicalism it has no actual historical precedent in its modern format. Prosperity theology is a recent development. A lot of the stuff that people talk about now is improvised. It came from earlier things, but not in its current form. So American religion historically has always been very improvisational. And I think what we're seeing now is similar to like the development of spiritualism in the 1800s in places like the Burned Over District in New York, where you had this amalgamation of like Christian beliefs, folk practices, and other odd spiritual ideas all coming together to form something like spiritualism. And you end up with like the Fox sisters. So I think that's what we're seeing with the Bigfoot people and the weird spiritual beliefs that are forming around it.
Yeah, because, I get it with the aliens. I understand with extraterrestrials, the connection, I think the inherent connection, but Bigfoot being so, I guess in my mind, the naturalistic quality of Bigfoot, I would know, you know what I mean? Like I would have thought it would have attracted a different kind of person.
You do have two camps. You have the people I'm talking about, the woo people, obviously woo-woo spiritual stuff. And then you have, some people I think call them like the hominid group, the primate group, the science group, the people who believe you can prove Bigfoot in a material reality using the scientific method. Now, obviously, they have a much more difficult time doing what they're doing because they're trying to ground things in reality in some sense. And it's hard to find a creature like Bigfoot, right?
A creature like Bigfoot does not exist and is not recognized by proper science, quote unquote.
Right.
Best I can tell.
I mean, yeah. So proving Bigfoot's existence is difficult. So some people turn to science, other people turn to religion.
Right.
And to your point about UFOs, there are people who believe that UFOs and Bigfoot are tied together, and they usually come up in the woo camp because Bigfoot can be an interdimensional being. Bigfoot can be an alien. Bigfoot, there are allegedly orbs that Bigfoot uses to pass through dimensions. So all kinds of strange stuff in the woo camp.
Cosmic Bigfoot, right?
Cosmic Bigfoot, yeah.
So where do you come down in these camps? Are you part of any of these camps? Are you kind of just standing back?
Yeah. I don't personally believe in Bigfoot myself, but I'm fascinated by the people who do. Yeah, so like all the stuff I'm into, like I don't necessarily believe in most of it. I believe that aliens, like intelligent life, is probably something that exists, but not in the form that we have experienced. I think most of that, obviously, as we've discussed, is disinformation for the purposes of like the government. Bigfoot, I think, is just, when God is dead, you need something to fill that void. So Bigfoot does that for some people.
Did you just say on my show that Bigfoot is God?
To some people.
I mean, it's interesting because it's something that I think about often as someone who has a movie podcast, and you have, again, people who I would say, and I think you would agree, are as fervent about Star Wars as people are about Bigfoot. And to them, it's modern mythology. It's a modern religious belief system in a lot of ways that can dictate and govern your life. And I don't see Bigfoot any different, or aliens. It's a modern coalescence into a new kind of pseudo religion. I guess it is a religion. Anything is a religion if you believe hard enough.
The one I went out to in Western PA, there was a couple that spoke. I forget their names offhand, but when the guy walked up, he looked like the biggest redneck you would have ever seen. You wouldn't expect him to be someone who was, spiritually aligned with Bigfoot. But then he comes up and he introduces his wife as a Reiki master. And I was like, well, this is headed somewhere interesting. And then they start talking about having, meditation with Bigfoot as an interdimensional being, Bigfoot and UFOs. And I was like, well, shit, this guy is really weird. So you encounter people like that all the time where, they surprise you with where they come from. Like, you're not expecting someone who looks like he's going out into the woods to hunt to be into New Age beliefs. But increasingly, that is who is. And if you look at other movements that are mainstreaming now, like QAnon, a lot of people previously would not have thought of them as being a New Age group. But increasingly, a lot of the people who are in QAnon believe in New Age ideas or participate in New Age practices.
What do you think makes it so palatable? Like the New Age ideas, what do you think makes it so palatable to that group of people?
I don't think it's just them. I mean, I think like you see it within the anti-vax community. You used to see it in the anti-GMO groups. A lot of people who hold strange beliefs will be attracted to strange religious ideas. Yep. Even within the mainstream of American culture, like Reagan was into astrology. Jimmy Carter saw UFOs. Like lots of people who are deeply religious hold unusual beliefs, sometimes bordering on the occult or otherwise. So it's not unusual for people to hold that. It's only a recent development, probably since Clinton, that people expect everyone to be like perfectly aligned, both politically, religiously, and so on.
Yeah, I don't understand complete and utter belief in one thing without any unyielding in either direction. That's dangerous.
I mean, people aren't, not everyone thinks the same way. So when they come at these things, it's not like everyone's perfectly evangelical in the same way. Not everyone's perfectly mainline Christian in the same way. Reagan and Francois Mitterrand believing in astrology was actually pretty normal for that era. Lots of people did. So,
man, lots of people do now.
Yeah, it's popular again after a brief lull. But I mean, there are lots of possible reasons for that.
Well, and what's weird is in a lot of ways, culturally now, I feel like if we were to draw an analog to where we all are culturally, it's reminiscent of the 70s in a lot of ways,
sure.
Right?
Yeah,
it feels like it, at least with like with the kinds of interest that people are having that seem to be swelling more mainstream than they have been in the last 20 years, 25 years, maybe.
Well, and I mean, there's all kinds of sociological theories where like in periods of great political upheaval, people become attracted to all kinds of strange ideas. So, for example, I believe in Russia and France, typically beliefs in like occultism grew in periods of great like political strife. That's something that happened sort of to some extent in the United States in the 60s and 70s. There was an intense interest in witchcraft, Satanism, and the occult at the same time where you were having the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and a lot of things like that. To what you were saying, I do think that politically we're in a period similar to the 70s where there was kind of a come down after the high of the protest movements, where a lot of that stuff sort of collapsed in on itself, either because of internal struggle or largely through government interference and infiltration, disrupting protest movements. And I think you see that a lot now, like the failures of Occupy Wall Street, the problems with the George Floyd protests and the way those were handled. So I think we're sort of in like a mindset maybe similar to the early 70s, mid 70s, where you have all of these strange ideas that are still very popular, in part because people are, that energy that was being built up in those movements, it has to go somewhere. So lots of people are being attracted to strange ideas.
And what's interesting is it's almost essentially the same strange ideas as before. It's not anything drastically different. I mean, Bigfoot, astrology. I mean, QAnon really is just QAnon's nothing special. It's not. It's nothing. It's nothing that folks like yourself and myself and others who are familiar with conspiracy theories. It's not something we've never seen before. It's just in a more palatable coding for a certain group of people to take under their tongue easier.
Right. And to some extent that stuff recurs throughout history. I mean, even in like scares with Satanism aren't uncommon. There was the Taxel hoax where I forget the writer's name, last name being Taxel. He basically trolled the Catholic Church, creating the image of Baphomet that we know now, in part because the Catholic Church was on a big anti-Masonry kick at the time. So he exploited those fears, and a lot of the stuff that we think about Satanism now partially comes from stuff like that. But, stuff like that recurs throughout history frequently.
But it's interesting that the tune continues to be the same, like no new ideas really exist. It's just a repackaging and a repurposing of old ideas. I mean, the Bigfoot convention or the Bigfoot festivals that you've gone to, it's not like anybody has a new idea. It's everybody just expounding personal beliefs onto the pre-existing belief set and kind of shimmying it however they see fit. But I mean, nobody is coming out and saying Bigfoot is... I don't know what you could say Bigfoot is at this point that somebody else hasn't already said. Bigfoot is Harrison Ford in a Bigfoot costume.
Bigfoot works for the deep state.
I feel like somebody has said that.
No, I mean, a lot of that stuff, I mean, if you think about it, none of these ideas are really original. Even when Bigfoot came about in the 70s, there were obviously prior precedents like the Yeti, the Abominable Snowman, even going back earlier than that. And I'm just talking about in Western culture, the idea of like the wild man goes back to Enkidu, in Gilgamesh. It goes back to Esau in the Bible. Like that figure of the wild man recurs through Western thought. And even in non-Western thought, you have like various indigenous cultures that
especially in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, stuff like the Wendigo and skinwalkers and things like that, big versions of Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So these are things that go back to the beginning of recorded history. It's just that we always try to make them relevant for our times, and the things that become popular are things that fit within the current zeitgeist.
Well, and it's a big bummer about Yeti because Yeti's just a bear, and it's such a bummer. It is like we were going to do an episode on the Yeti earlier today, and we ended up scrapping it because after we did enough research, I think everybody just said, yeah, I don't want to talk about bears for an hour and a half.
Right.
But at the same time, like you've mentioned, a lot of cultures have pre-existing stories about, yeah, cosmic Bigfoot. And everybody is that what everybody's getting on board with? Is that the overwhelming push now? Is that what you're
everybody
saying?
It's the current within that community I'm most interested in, because it seems like it's the weirdest one, and I'm always attracted to the weirdest ideas possible. I also think that if you're approaching Bigfoot as a creature that you can uncover through the scientific method, you're obviously going to have problems, or you're going to encounter them at some point, because proving the existence of something that, even if we take it at face value, Bigfoot doesn't want to be seen, right? Proving the existence of something like that will be very difficult. And the evidence that we are left with is often like plaster casts of footprints or alleged noises recorded by, paranormal grifters most of the time, because I don't believe that most of the people who end up on TV doing these types of shows are doing it with sincerity most of the time.
Whoa. Well, hold on. You're telling me that when Zach Bagans goes and screams at ghosts, he's not genuine? Hold on a second.
No.
Hold on now, Mr. Skvarla. I don't know if I believe you. I'm just fucking kidding. Obviously, I feel the same way about the Bigfoot people. You're on TV. Like, what else do you need?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples with him in particular, there's the case in Connecticut with it was just the last Conjuring movie. I forget the name of the family.
The Arnie Johnson thing.
The
Devil Made
case.
Me Do It case.
Yeah, so Baggins bought a chair from the Glatzel. The Glatzels was the name of the actual family. I don't know if they keep the name in the movie, but the Glatzel family was allegedly the one where the youngest son was possessed by the devil. Now,
right.
The youngest son and one of his older brothers for 30 or 40 years maintained it never happened and he was just mentally ill. Within the last 2 to 3 years, because of the release of the Conjuring movie, one of those two brothers sold an alleged rocking chair to Zach Baggins because it was haunted, even though he said for years that the devil did not possess his younger brother. The devil didn't do anything. All of this was made up for attention. When money comes into the equation, when Zach Baggins approaches him, suddenly, yes, it's legitimate. It's real.
I don't know if you've heard of a Dybbuk box before, but I've got one that I could sell to you that killed
I'm sure Zach would buy it.
He did. He bought the Dybbuk box. It's in his museum right now. The one that's totally fake, that the guy who made it says is fake. And Baggins' response is literally, there's a lot of information on the internet. You can't trust all of it.
Right.
Of course there is. You happen to be one of those purveyors, my friend.
And this is where my personal beliefs come in. So I don't have a problem with anyone who holds unusual beliefs, who holds spooky beliefs, who has weird religious beliefs until it becomes either you're manipulating people or you're harming people. Someone like Baggins, he falls into a little of A, a little of B. The QAnon people definitely fall into the B camp where they're harming people. But someone like the weird Christian folk magic dude, the powwower at the Bigfoot Festival, he wasn't hurting anybody. He even said, if someone's diagnosed with cancer and they come to me to do, a ritual on them, I tell them to consult a doctor. That's all I ask. If someone wants to have something in addition to that to help them, guide them in their faith, guide them in, to give them a peace of mind in addition to seeking actual legitimate medical advice, I'm fine with it. If people want to hold personal beliefs that are unusual, I'm fine with it. I don't care. It's when you harm someone or you lie to someone. And in the case of like the Arnie Johnson case, Arnie Johnson lied about the guy that he killed. He was not possessed when he did it. He was friends with the guy, both he and his wife. They were living at the guy's house rent free, or at least Debbie Glatzel was. So stuff like that bothers me when people lie or manipulate or hurt others.
Well, and I'm with you. And, I think we've talked or at least mentioned, speaking of Conjuring, the Warrens. I think we've mentioned them before.
Big hucksters. Yes.
Yeah. And again, I believe that they believe that there was something going on. Who knows if there was? Again, I think to your point, now anything that they've done almost feels suspect because it's a fucking movie universe now with multi-million dollars. Yeah. It's a, like you said, when there's money to be made, morals and a lot of qualms go out the window very quickly when, you have a $1 billion franchise that you cannot afford to lose legitimacy.
I'm not even bothered by the fact that there's money involved. It's more like in situations like that specifically where the initial story with the Glatzel case was that the guy who got stabbed to death was kind of an asshole and in a way kind of brought it on himself.
Right.
Because even if you don't believe that they were possessed, it sort of reads like that. But if you actually go back and read the news coverage from when it happened, Debbie, Arnie, all of them were like, nah, he was a good guy. It's just, I was possessed. Devil made me do it. So stuff like that, when you're lying about someone and kind of like slandering their memory, legacy, whatever you want to call it, it bothers me.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, again, I think it still strikes me as strange that they made that Conjuring movie on that case because the first two cases that they did were so just kind of haunted house with ghosts, not anything controversial or even like, again, validity aside, that's one thing, but it felt like a bad choice because again, like you've said,
you're bringing someone real into it. You're bringing a real person into it.
Yeah. And it completely devalues the real person.
Yeah. But with the Bigfoot stuff, generally you don't encounter that. Thankfully, one of the reasons why I'm interested in it. Sometimes the UFO stuff doesn't, but a lot of the people who become involved in the UFO community eventually turn crazy and get attracted to all sorts of wild ideas, which could potentially hurt people.
Bill Cooper.
Bill Cooper, Heaven's Gate, all of that stuff. Yeah. Cooper particularly is an unfortunate character because that dude never started off from a good place and he just kept getting worse and worse as he went along. Because Behold the Pale Horse is probably one of the most influential books ever, or at least in the United States since it was released.
Yeah, I again, like you've said, the way the messaging is used anymore, it's hard to suss out who doesn't have a finger on why they're doing it, like a genuine reason. Everybody feels like they have a reason for doing something. It's not just general discourse anymore. There is no such thing as general discourse. It all has a purpose or a reason, or someone's trying to make money or influence. And the discourse doesn't even exist on like a macro level anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, just the way things exist now, it's difficult to become attracted to anything without getting pulled into really bad communities that form around them. I'm sure there's probably some toxic element within the Bigfoot community. I'm not part of the Bigfoot community. I simply observe it as an outsider because of interest in, obviously, the spiritual component.
Right.
But you'll find that anywhere you go today, unfortunately, like you're saying.
So the spiritual component of the Bigfoot question, I guess, for the people that believe the spiritual part of it, they're not obviously not all on the same page. They're all reading the same book, though, essentially, right?
Well, I mean, there isn't like a formal book on
but you know
it.
what I mean, like
people,
just like the metaphorical book. They're all kind of reading from the same book, maybe just not the same page type thing.
Well, yes and no. I mean, so like some people, they don't all agree on the same stuff with regard to the spiritual component or the supernatural element to it. So some of them believe that Bigfoot is an interdimensional being. Some of them believe that Bigfoot is an alien. Some of them believe that Bigfoot might be some kind of like pagan, I don't want to say godlike figure, but like some kind of figure in that vein.
Like a nature spirit?
Nature spirit, sure. Okay. Yeah. So like the fact that Bigfoot can pass between dimensions or has orbs that he uses, or she, they, whatever you want to refer to Bigfoot as, there isn't really agreement between anyone in that community. They do draw from each other, from what I've seen, but it's all still very individualized to the individual people making the claims.
So of those kind of messages within the spiritual Bigfoot community, what is the overwhelming one? Is there one kind of thing that they can agree on, or is it just there is a spiritual component to Bigfoot? We don't know. We can't agree on what it is, but something about Bigfoot is inherently spiritual.
I mean, there are common themes like stuff I keep mentioning: interdimensionality, UFOs, orbs disappearing. Right. I mean, you do get into some really weird ones where people believe that, and this is something that happens in both the spiritual and the science-based community, that Bigfoot has some ability to cloak his or herself. Some believe that Bigfoot is able to hide because they can pass through dimensions. Some believe in the science-based community that Bigfoot is a chameleon-like figure that can blend in with their surroundings. So you get all kinds of strange ideas, and there are some common themes, but it's still very individualized.
And so when you were at the Bigfoot kind of festival, they had both sides of it, though, right? They had the kind of science side of it. They had speakers for that, and they had the cosmic intergalactic Bigfoot as well. Or was
the one in Western PA? Definitely, they had both. The guy who was into science, one of the guys who was into science, he went immediately after the couple I spoke about earlier, and he didn't name them, but he sort of made like jokes about the woo people and those types of beliefs. The Albert Witch one, I wasn't able to catch all of the lectures. I got there a little late, and it was more of a mixture of like local folklore, along with other ideas. One guy gave a lecture about Toad Road, which is an alleged gate to hell. Like in Stull, Kansas, there's an alleged gate to hell. Every state sort of has their own version of that, and at least out near York, PA, it's Toad Road.
And
so there was like local folklore.
You drive down the road and you
have to drive around or pass around the gate a couple of times to unlock it. This guy was very particular in saying that no one's ever actually done it, because I think he was a bit skeptical of it. He's someone who probably held or still holds some unusual beliefs, but he's researched it enough to be like, yeah, I don't think this is probably a real thing. Or if it is, it's not what people are saying, because obviously gate to hell, kind of hard to prove.
Right. Like so many things we've been talking about. Yeah. Gate to hell, imminently hard to prove.
Yeah, short of getting pulled into hell, you're not going to see it.
Yeah. So I guess with all of this Bigfoot and the cryptid talk, were they talking about any other cryptids, or was it solely Bigfoot? I mean, does this share into the other cryptid parts of the cryptid community, or is this like a Bigfoot specific thing?
So Bigfoot specific ones are usually Bigfoot specific because there's it's more well known and it has a stronger fan base. So one of the things that you observe, or at least I've observed with paranormal stuff like this, is it really started taking off in the 70s. But at the time, one of the things you'll notice in TV shows like In Search of, they have to jump around between topics because no one's truly specialized in that field yet. There weren't Bigfoot experts.
Right.
As you get into the 80s, you still see this to some extent with stuff like Unsolved Mysteries and some of the other shows. Like, they have to go between segments because there still isn't a strong enough community around these subjects. But as you get into the 90s, you get shows like Sightings or Encounters, which focus specifically on paranormal. So you see TV shows building up around individual subjects. Then in the 2000s, that really blossoms. Ghost Hunters, Finding Bigfoot, all of these shows on cable.
Monster Quest.
So there's this kind of like mainstreaming of these ideas because they've been in the public consciousness long enough for people to develop some level of expertise, facilitated obviously by the financial incentives of putting these ideas on cable. But so if you go to one of those festivals today, Bigfoot's going to be primarily about Bigfoot. The Albert Witch one was a little more looser because not as many people are familiar with the Albert Witch. You can't necessarily build a full day around it.
Right.
So there was a speech about Toad Road. There was a speech about powwowing. There was a speech about all kinds of stuff. When you go to cryptid festivals, it usually depends on the subject. Mothman is popular enough to have his own festival. UFOs festivals sometimes are generalized, but they can be very specific in nature. In PA here, there's one out near Kecksburg for the Kecksburg sighting. It's all based just around that. So it depends really on where you go.
Interesting.
And the community that's developed around the subject.
Yeah.
I think in Tennessee, there was one for Dogman this year. I couldn't make it to, but I'm assuming it was primarily about the Dogman since that was what it was advertised as.
Right. Yeah, it's super interesting because I know that they had a Bigfoot festival here, and they do it every year. And I think it's like an hour or two from here, and they get some really like big name people, like people that again you've like Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who is on like half of every Bigfoot anything. It feels like. Like half the time it's either him or Lauren Coleman, who it's just like, it's one of them. And those are like, and like you said, it's because now we have the Bigfoot experts or people that are self-described Bigfoot experts. Jeff Meldrum obviously is he's the only one, I guess, studying it in a real, truly anthropological way. I guess that's what he always says, but I don't know how valid that even is anymore in 2022.
Right. And I mean, it's not that they didn't have experts early on. I think there was a guy like Eric John Beckyard or something like that who ran some paranormal museums in the 80s and 90s. Ed Kay in the Seattle area ran one of the first Bigfoot, like fully official Bigfoot museums in the 70s. So like you had people like that. It's just that they weren't as prominent and they didn't have as many opportunities to speak publicly. So with cable really needing to fill time, these people developed. And now with the way social media and in particular YouTube is, the need for content, that churn, that constant desire to consume more and more, these people are going to appear because of the financial incentives that are generated by their presence. You need lots of cheap content, so these people will pop up to talk to whoever they want to, or who wants to talk to them.
Giorgio Tsoukalos knows how to make a pretty penny off of those appearances.
That show has been going forever too, man.
20 fucking seasons or some shit. I mean, honest to God, I can't believe it in a way because I'm not going to say you would have thought by now they would have exhausted everything, but you would have thought by now they would be recycling material because.
Well, so I mean, the thing with them that's interesting is, so of all the alien theories, I've always been the most like apprehensive towards the ancient alien theories because of like where it came from with Chariots of the Gods. And like technically one of the editors of that, not technically, one of the editors of the German version of it, who allegedly put a lot of content into the book, was died in the wool Nazi back in the day. So a lot of those ideas sort of filtered into that. And if you watch it today, what's the guy's name again? Giorgio
Tsoukalos.
Yeah, Giorgio Tsoukalos. He seems cool. He seems very nice. And if you follow him, he doesn't seem like he's particularly like weird.
He seems like a pretty low energy dude, honestly, like comparatively to the person we see on the show. He seems pretty like level headed and
But like,
he's very
peacekeeper.
It's very weird.
If you follow the ideas on the show, you get into all kinds of stuff. Like I was watching one when I went to my parents' house a couple of months ago, and it was basically like we have the great replacement theory now where, people believe that immigrants are being used to replace Americans. That was essentially like the thrust of the episode. It's like aliens were doing an acclimation program to replace the human race. So you see like these really shady, dangerous ideas that get this patina of respectability through weird paranormal and supernatural ideas. So that's one of the reasons why I've always been like Ancient Aliens, Ancient Astronauts has always been very sketch to me, because it sort of started from that place and it rapidly pulls in all of those like Bill Cooper style ideas, aliens, immigrants are coming here to replace us.
Yeah, and to your point, it's very strange to me as well that it wasn't as much strange as much as just a bummer, frankly. Like you said, that again, that the lines for these two belief systems are so close that they're fuzzy, that it's hard to tell them apart when we're talking about like the alien question and then Bill Cooper. Like they're so close that they're hard to distinguish in a lot of ways. And like you said, it's just, you pull one thing in and it's a very, as they say, it's a very slippery slope for other much more radical and I think much more dangerous ideas. Because I think there's inherently anything dangerous, at least in my mind, there's not anything dangerous about questioning where did we come from as a species. I don't think there's anything dangerous about that inherently. But like you said, you start spinning it off into superiority of the genders or the species or the races, and that's when we start running into a lot of very problematic things very fucking quickly, frankly.
Right. I mean, so it's not even that this is a recent development. If you follow, like, at least in the American context, weird supernatural and spiritual beliefs through UFOs and stuff, you had people like William Dudley Pelley, who ran the Silver Shirts, which was a fascist institution, who also believed in UFOs in that earlier period. You had all kinds of strange people who, like, this idea that the New Age movement itself is inherently left-wing was only a very recent development to a particular period in history, generally the 60s through the 90s. If you follow it back to the beginnings, at least in the American context, you get stuff like the I Am movement, which was a weird New Age spiritual movement that was also intensely nationalistic. So supernatural beliefs always hold the potential for that, and frequently they're exploited for those reasons because they can offer explanations that run counter to what we understand to be, common sense.
Well, and I'm kind of surprised, but not really, that we haven't had any candidates really running heavily on one of those platforms. Like less the QAnon, obviously, because we have people doing that, but I'm talking more about the more esoteric, more alien, cryptid, paranormal, supernatural facing. I'm surprised that that's still not something we've really had somebody full on embrace. Like we've had people obviously full on embrace something like as absolutely batshit insane as QAnon.
Well, there was a guy who was in the House of Representatives, Denver Riggleman. He wasn't running on a Bigfoot platform, but he was running as a Republican. And it came out that he wrote Bigfoot erotica. So he was someone who genuinely believed in this stuff, and he won his seat, even though this came out. So those people do exist out there. And particularly now with the way the Pentagon is handling UFOs, there are lots of people who I'm sure will be running on those platforms very shortly. One day, Lou Elizondo will run as a Trump-style candidate because that's who he is.
That's fair.
I mean, if you follow Lou, the way he attacks people, anyone who even offers the mildest criticism, he just goes into attack mode, and he treats them not just as like a counterpart, but as an enemy. So he's very much a Trumpian figure. And I think he probably will end up in the House, or I hope not the Senate, but he will definitely hold some kind of political position at some point.
And so what is the next logical step beyond this? Is there a further refinement of the ideas and messaging here? Because again, like you said, this messaging and this idea and the usage of these kinds of beliefs in tandem with something a little bit more nefarious or nationalistic. I mean, like you said, this is not anything new. For fuck's sake, the Thule Society in Nazi Germany was completely and utterly obsessed with the occult. And that wasn't just them doing it. That was from Hitler himself saying, go do this, please, on my behalf. So what is the next logical step here for something like this?
I mean, I don't know if there's a logical step because a lot of this stuff isn't logical by the nature of the type of beliefs. But I mean, even if you look at like the evangelicals who functionally run the government, groups like the Council for National Policy, a lot of what they believe in is probably comparable to the occult. So they're already in power in some sense. These people with wacky ideas run things. They just took away, or they're trying to take away, and they're getting fairly close to doing so, Roe versus Wade, because, it's not grounded in any rational material belief. It's just basically, this is something, this guy in the sky told us.
It's a moral question that you're imposing on everybody else.
Yeah. So, I mean, these types of people are already there. It's a variation of it, a more acceptable version of it. When people tell me, like, how can you be okay with someone believing this? I'm like, lots of people in positions of power already believe crazy shit. Some dude who wants to go off in the woods and chase Bigfoot, who cares?
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell the dude he's right. I'm not going to say I believe in Bigfoot, because I don't, but I'm going to say, so long as he isn't harming anybody, so long as this is his personal, this is his thing, who cares?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think we've said this almost every time we've spoken. I liked, and I know you did, I was interested in conspiracy theories before it became this kind of r/conspiracy nightmare where everybody is just it's more politically driven than it ever has been. Because again, like you said, it was always beneath the surface. Like you said, it was always there, and there was the opportunity for you to go down that path, but those two paths were not conjoined at the hip like they are now. You cannot have one without the other now, is what it feels like.
I mean, I'm going to push back here a little bit. I think conspiracy beliefs, conspiracy theories have always been useful to some extent. Like one of the other subjects we've talked about, because it's something I research, is COINTELPRO and government programs of suppression, repression, abuse. Like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, J. Edgar Hoover put into effect the Lavender Scare, essentially getting anyone who was gay kicked out of office, or they lost their jobs based on the idea that they could be either compromised, that they were of low moral character, or they held some inherent quality that was just something that was unbecoming of an American. That was accomplished through conspiracies and conspiratorial types of beliefs. The Red Scare, primarily, like, obviously there are some instances where we can confirm the Soviet Union was interacting with Americans, the Venona papers and stuff like that, but there was never any high level of infiltration of the government. A lot of that was just conspiratorial thinking. And even further, like, actual conspiracy beliefs grew out of that. Havana syndrome, which we've talked about, the precursor to that is the Moscow signal, which happened from allegedly the 50s through the 70s, where supposedly Soviet scientists were beaming US diplomats in our embassy in Moscow with radiation. But what it actually was a combination of just industrial equipment that existed in a major city center like Moscow, and the Soviets using low-level energy, low-level radio frequency energy to activate passive listening devices for the purpose of espionage. But this grew into a kind of conspiratorial belief that Russians were infecting our diplomats with cancer. Nothing has ever been proven. Even our own government research into it disproved the idea that this was real, but it was used as a kind of, as information warfare. The stuff persists because conspiratorial beliefs are normal in some sense. They've always been there, and they're useful in many ways. They've always been weaponized, and they're just continuing to be weaponized in different ways today.
I feel like now it's just so much more out in the open. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm wrong. But it
depends, by the end of the 70s, I think something like 3/4 of Americans believed that the government was somehow involved in the JFK assassination. That number went down in the 80s, 90s, and a little into the early 2000s because of conscious efforts on the part of the government and other groups to, play up this idea of rationalism. But lots of people have always believed weird and conspiratorial things. It's just that for small slivers in history, they haven't, or it's not covered to the extent that it is now. It's politically useful to talk about conspiracy theories today because it helps both parties to some degree, and they can attack each other over what they perceive to be conspiratorial beliefs, whether that is, Trump is a Russian agent or it's all a hoax. It's perpetuated by the Democrats to whatever, there's two sides to that, and they gain something from it.
Yeah. No, that you're completely right there. I don't know, like you've said.
I don't have to be right. I could be wrong.
No, but I do think you're right. I do think you're right. Again, it's what's depressing about, just even thinking about like the people at the Bigfoot convention or the Bigfoot, just thinking about like, again, the messaging, all the messaging has to do is change a little bit, and it's just, And you hate to see Bigfoot used that way, really. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, but you know what I mean? Not to be
Bigfoot
wistful.
is a friend of all creatures.
Right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it feels a little like, what the fuck is your problem? Like, Bigfoot of all things. But again, like you said, if there is an opportunity to get the door open, even a sliver, even a little bit, to get the initial inkling of that secondary or more pervasive idea in there with something that you already believe, like, they're going to try to do it. Because, like you said, there's a reason, there's a way, they need to, they have to make money, whatever it is, people will do it. And yeah, and that's why we've got Ancient Aliens running for 25 seasons on History Channel.
Yeah, I mean,
Fuck,
it's just
man.
the state of the world. So all of these things have been there and they will be there again. It's just the nature of humans.
Yeah.
We're prone to looking for answers regardless of whether it makes sense or not. I guess you could call that, what's the phrase, apophenia, where you're looking for patterns where they don't exist.
Yeah.
I'm obviously guilty of that myself in many ways, but, you know.
Well, it's like the guy in Dealey Plaza with the umbrella, right? Like the most unlucky guy in Dealey Plaza to be standing there with a fucking umbrella. The one day the president gets shot, and all of a sudden you've got a secret umbrella gun, and it was
I don't
you know what I'm
think
talking
the Umbrella
about?
Man did it. I do think the CIA domed JFK, but I don't think it was Umbrella Man.
But who was it that did the guy who directed Errol Morris? Didn't he do like a little short about the umbrella guy? Have you seen that?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and he's just like, you unlucky motherfucker standing in Dealey Plaza with a fucking umbrella. Just, you happen to look weird on the wrong day.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I don't think the umbrella guy did anything either. Yeah, obviously the CIA killed JFK. Right?
I mean, there's another callback to Bill Cooper, though. I mean, he was one of the guys who was, he said the Secret Service did it, right?
Yeah.
So everyone sort of gets in on those, even, you know, the weirdos. If they can find a way to make money off of it, they will.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the conspiracy theory was that was my entry point to all of this. I think it had to have been JFK. I mean, it's one of the big ones for us as Americans or Westerners. And for a lot of people much older than us, it was a thing that they actually experienced. We don't have that as a reference point. But for me, the JFK assassination reference point was always the conspiracy. It was never even he got shot. It was who did it. Whoever died wasn't the important part. It was the who did it that was the important part, which is in and of itself very fucked up. But I mean, again, but fucking the victim is the president of the United States. But let's worry about who killed him ultimately. So,
yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have I don't recall what my entry point is. I grew up watching all of that stuff, the X-Files. I remember one of the first movies. It's not one of the first movies I saw, but that I can remember is the Charlie Sheen movie, The Arrival. So like that stuff was always in the periphery for me. It's just that like where I actually began believing conspiracies exist was, you know, reality. When 2020 happened, you know, first there was Bernie in the Iowa caucus where something obviously happened. And then there was the George Floyd protests where I witnessed both my local police department and the city actively covering up the police department's attempts to provoke violence. So like those are the things that ultimately made me want to talk about this stuff. But prior to that, it's just, you know, it was always something I was interested in.
Yeah, the firsthand experiencing, I feel like is a real changing point, right? I mean, clearly, I mean, you've talked about it before, but it's just to hear about it and talk about it is one thing, but like you said, to kind of see it in action and to see it happening around us is just, I mean, again, I feel like, and I know you've said this before, like conspiracies more or less are just operating out in the open anyways. Like this, that's, you know, the best way. Yeah. The best way to hide it is just to not hide it at all.
Right. I posted something recently. It actually went viral on Twitter about a police officer who was trying to be a whistleblower, Adrian Schoolcraft, in 2009. I believe it was 2008, 2009. He was secretly recording conversations showing that the NYPD was misclassifying or downgrading crimes like murder and rape so that they wouldn't show up in the statistics, because in a city, you don't want to have a lot of violent crime. It's bad for the city's image. So he eventually tried to work his way up through his chain of command. Ultimately, what happened on Halloween of 2010 is the NYPD kidnapped him and committed him involuntarily to a mental institution. The way I framed this when I posted about it was, you know, people always say conspiracies couldn't exist because someone would talk. My point here being, he tried to talk, the conspiracy still happened, and an even greater one went into effect where they literally tried to commit him so they could label him crazy. Stuff like this happens all the time. There are whistleblowers, people try and talk, they're just either discredited were literally framed as crazy.
Or are shot and killed.
Yeah, in the case of many of the witnesses who were supposed to testify at the House Select Committee on Assassinations for JFK, William Sullivan, one of the highest people in the chain of command for COINTELPRO, allegedly was shot in a hunting accident. If you actually dig into it, it was probably an assassination. Even the individual who was responsible for investigating it for the state's Department of Fish and Game, because for some reason he was the guy charged with investigating a shooting in the woods. Something like 30 years later, I think it was an interview in some magazine in New Hampshire or wherever it happened. He even said he still has questions to this day because he knows he wasn't the right person to investigate it. So like these things happen.
Well, and like you just said, I mean, I think people like to believe that if a conspiracy was happening, people would say something, but no, like that's just, they try.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of my points. Like with COINTELPRO, FBI agents tried to blow the whistle on it more than once in the early and mid 60s, and they were just either discredited or kicked out of the agency.
Country does a lot in the name of fighting communism, but very few people in this country have any idea what the fuck communism actually is.
Precisely.
God. Yeah, I think that for me is also just one of the other things, that it's just the amount of things that have been done in our country conspiratorially to combat communism or under the guise of combating communism is even probably a better way of putting it, like you just said. Yeah,
the treatment being worse than the disease.
Yeah, boy. Well, and again, it's, when we start turning on one another, what's even the fucking point here? So, I mean, again, the McCarthyism and all of that aside, we're past that, but now we're into something a lot darker and more sinister, where every side seems like they're touting conspiracies. Nobody can even agree on what base truth is or base reality is. And that is the most disconcerting thing out of all of this, is the lack of an ability for anyone to even agree on 3 facts, let alone 2, let alone even 1 anymore.
Right. I mean, I think that's actually kind of normal, at least going through American history. If you look at the world before World War II, that's sort of how things were. The truth was subjective based on who had power. Hearst papers would often guide specific narratives. I believe they're one of the reasons for the Mexican-American War, right?
Yeah, so, yellow journalism.
Yeah, so after World War II, there was just a very specific set of circumstances that allowed for control of the media. So because of that, because there were only 3 television stations, because there were a limited number, there were lots of newspapers, but they were still subject to a lot of government interference. So it was much easier to agree on a set of facts because they were all coming from the same source, our government. Over time, that has changed as media has democratized, as media has advanced. So it's much more difficult to control a narrative today. I still think they are very good at doing it in certain circumstances, Havana syndrome being one, but it's more difficult in other ways as well.
All those Sinclair broadcasting channels is a pretty good example too, and that's easy to see. It's gotten harder to do, but they've also gotten better at doing it. So, I mean,
I guess that goes to my point earlier about like the mainstreaming of many of these weird supernatural ideas. You didn't really see a lot of this stuff in the 50s or even to some extent the 60s. It really only started happening in the 70s when more and more TV stations began popping up, when special interest magazines, it became cheaper to produce, newsletters, zines, the internet. As all of this stuff appeared, there was a need for more content, constant content. So a lot of ideas that would not have made it to public air on a broadcast network like ABC or CBS, or if they were, they'd be relegated to, the very late night hours. They became commonplace on cable. So channels like Sci-Fi devoted their entire programming slate to reruns of In Search of, all kinds of shows and reruns of stuff that had aired previously, new content based around that. So all of these supernatural and spooky ideas, it was a financial necessity to put them on the air. People had to make money in some way. These were very popular, so we're going to keep making money off of them.
So I'm curious, have you ever been to a paranormal or supernatural convention where the slant is more towards ghosts and spirits and the afterlife? Have you been to one of those?
I have not, mostly because I'm not as interested in that.
Sure.
It's not that I don't have an interest in ghost hunting. I think I would like to at least check it out on occasion because, again, there's that spiritual element to it. You can't believe in ghosts unless you believe in some kind of spirituality in some way. there's no material grounding for a belief in ghosts. So you have to have some spiritual or supernatural belief system guiding you.
Do you think so? What's
a material representation of a ghost? Like, how do you ground that in scientific fact?
It could just be energy. And like you said before, energy that has nowhere to go. But I mean, energy never is destroyed, right? It just changes form. I don't prescribe to that.
I'm trying to like wrap my head around it. That's why I'm asking.
Sure. No, I don't subscribe to that thinking, but that is what I have heard, where it's, energy that is built up has nowhere to go. And so it's being expressed in ways that we can't completely fully understand. But that's also one of those things where it's like, part of this we can't explain.
Yeah.
Okay. Like you said, and that's where it becomes spiritual or religious, are the, things you can't explain automatically take on that bent. I think just because it's the convenient bent to take, because that's the one that nobody's really going to question you on. If you just say, well, it's a spiritual thing. Okay. The religious thing. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I'm not opposed to ever going to one of those. It's just, they tend to interest me less because they tend to be more conventional, because most of the people you encounter, or at least that I've seen on paranormal shows, are often people who subscribe to like Christian style beliefs. So you're operating with it in that framework. And I'm less interested than I would be if I were to go to a Bigfoot festival and I see some couple talking about Bigfoot and UFOs and passing between dimensions and meditating with Bigfoot and communicating through telepathy, mind speak.
Not Bigfoot on the cross.
I'm sure there's someone out there who does Bigfoot on a cross. I'm just, that's more of like a Lovecraftian vision to me personally.
Bigfoot on a cross. Jesus, he rises from the deep on his fucking cross. Well, and I think, like you said, there is this kind of hard question that I think is not easily answered of, do you have to believe in something spiritual or religious to have a belief in ghosts? And like you said, I can completely see where you're coming from. But I think at the same time, I think there would be people but again, like the scientific community, like with Bigfoot, like with aliens, like with any of this, they're not interested in taking this seriously. And in a lot of ways, it feels like for good reason, but at the same time, it's a little unfortunate, but I get it. Because again, there's a lot of things that come with it in regards to not only yourself, but then your future body of work, how it's perceived by anybody else in your community ever again as well.
Sure. I'd be curious to know how many of those people also identify as spiritual but not religious. So there's still that component there. You can have those spiritual beliefs without that Christian framework, like I was mentioning before. It's just that in the paranormal community with ghosts specifically, that's usually how it seems to play out, especially when you watch like those shows like A Haunting and stuff like that. It's usually like, we brought an exorcist into the house to clean this place, or I used a cross to protect myself, like it's a vampire or something, that tends to be at least how I've seen it play out.
That's right. Well, and then you have something like Ghost Adventures or their ilk, which is, I guess, attempting to be more scientific, but again, it does still boil down to, you've got a medium and then you've got PKE meters. Like you're trying to merge seemingly two disparate ideas of the organic supernatural and the scientific supernatural, which I always think is, your mileage is going to vary with what you hear on all these EVPs, and whether or not I heard the devil on your EVP is going to be, it's up for your interpretation to tell me. I mean, they never play those things and say, let me know what you think you heard. It's, here is what
I heard.
Exactly. And and like you said before, people are always looking for patterns and things that they're hearing and seeing. And it's, I would be curious as well. But again, like you said, if that community is always going to have more of a religious and spiritual bent just on the face of it. So it just,
it seems like that's what it mostly is. So
that's the expectation almost.
Because there isn't that, it doesn't tend to be as improvisational as like the Bigfoot community, where, like I was saying before, the woo people, like the spiritual people, they're not as coherent. It's all different people with different ideas. And I think they're in the early stages of maybe finding something more coherent, which is why it's more interesting. A lot of reports of ghosts all play out the same, some type of apparition, some type of noise, some type of knocking. I see something out of the corner of my eye. Like the way we understand ghosts tends to be, it's a routine that everyone sort of follows now. Whereas with like the Bigfoot stuff, it's still at least a little interesting in how people encounter Bigfoot or speak about Bigfoot.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I remember seeing an episode of Is It Real on Nat Geo where was it Is It Real? Or was another one where they were talking about how much Bigfoot loved this one Bigfoot that would come to this woman's house that backed up to a forest. The Bigfoot would you're going to love this. The Bigfoot would come and knock on her door and she would give the Bigfoot garlic because that's what the Bigfoot liked. And the Bigfoot would take whole heads of garlic and go back into the woods. And this woman was as sincere as all can fucking be, just talking about how she would commune with Bigfoot and he would come get garlic from her and take it. And sometimes he would pick it out of the garden. Sometimes she would just give it to him.
Bigfoot is a reverse vampire.
I guess so. But like you said, it's just like, I guess my final question to you is the people that are religious and spiritual in the Bigfoot community versus the people that are scientific. Are the people that are religious and spiritual in the Bigfoot community, are they rallying around Bigfoot or are they rallying around their spiritual beliefs? Because the scientific people are rallying around the idea that Bigfoot exists. Are the people that are spiritual and religious, is it less about Bigfoot and more about something else? Is Bigfoot the conduit through which they have a different conversation? Because the scientific people are having a conversation about whether or not Bigfoot exists. That's rather binary. That's 1 and 0. Right. Spiritual people, are they all in agreement that Bigfoot exists, or is it like Bigfoot?
They all believe Bigfoot exists. Okay. It's just they don't necessarily know what Bigfoot is.
Okay.
Like I was saying before, some of them see it as a spiritual being, like I think you said some kind of nymph before or something.
Like a forest spirit, yeah.
Forest spirit, yeah. Some see it as like Bigfoot being an alien creature. Right. Some see it as being like, an interdimensional thing.
So it's their spirituality then that's like, really like coalescing them together.
Well, I mean, I still think it's the overriding interest in Bigfoot is what's driving them. It's just they're trying to understand it through a different framework than science, because they might, some of them go on, actual like Bigfoot trips with the science people. But, if you're seeing Bigfoot as something you can communicate with through meditation, obviously that's going to be very different than someone who's, out there trying to record noises. Your standard of evidence is going to be different, and it's based in your spiritual practices in some sense.
Well, and like you said, I don't want to be the person out there who's trying to capture and prove Bigfoot, because that's a thankless fucking job, and you are going to die without proving it. Yeah, well, I mean, it's just realistic.
You'll make some money depending on who you are.
Right. Well, sure, but you're never going to prove that Bigfoot exists. The hunt and the chase is more important than the destination.
Ain't going to prove God exists either, but people keep trying to do it.
Exactly. And you're not going to prove ghosts exist either, or aliens. Well, no, I mean, if aliens exist, they will prove that they exist. We're not going to be doing that for them if they, however the hell they exist. Yeah, the Bigfoot community is an interesting group of folks for sure. And the Bigfoot as a cosmic being thing is just, I've heard it more recently than I ever heard it before. We
will probably hear more of it as time goes on. And that's why I'm interested in it. I want to definitely try and hit some of those up again next year when I am able to, because they generally end around like October, November for seasonal reasons.
Sure. Well, and again, I mean, the Bigfoot as a cosmic being has become more popular now with Missing 411, with Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah. I mean, the Skinwalker, they talk about Bigfoot at Skinwalker Ranch on that show, and they talk about it in other places about Skinwalker Ranch. So again, that's one of the places where Bigfoot as a cosmic being is a thing, just like Missing 411. And those are pretty big, pretty popular now, at least Skinwalker Ranches. I don't know. Mainstream wise, I think Missing 411 has gotten a fair amount of traction. I mean, I see him making the circuit every now and then talking about it, but that's like Bigfoot adjacent. And that's also like angry Bigfoot, it would seem like some sort of vicious, aggressive Bigfoot, I guess, is what they're positing. So
Bigfoot is evil and kidnapping and eating people.
Sure. I guess like it could be as right as anything else. I don't think
they ever come out and say that, but I think that's one of the possible explanations,
Yeah, those Missing 411 things, they don't take much of a stance, do they? No, things happened. What it is, we do not know.
Yeah, I don't know if David Paulides is ever going to come out outright and say Bigfoot is murdering people.
Yeah, but in at least I think it's the second documentary, it's like it's very heavily implied. It's
probably what happened, right?
I mean, hey, you're right. Like, I'm fucking sure it's as likely a scenario as any. So I guess. I mean, hey, when you're talking about seeing something in a tree that's cloaking, it could be Bigfoot or it could be the Predator for all the fuck I know. And if it was anything at all, again, whatever. Personal beliefs are so strange that I would believe people could see something in a tree that's not there, as I'm sure, again, that's not that hard of a leap to make. So, man, well, the Bigfoot folks entertained you for a weekend, which is good. Yeah, that's great.
No, yeah, like I said, I definitely want to go back to some more. I would like to get to the Mothman Festival eventually because it seems like one of the biggest ones, but we'll see where the next year takes me.
Is the Mothman, that's like mainstream as fuck now, clearly.
It is, yes.
Like hyper mainstream.
I mean, that seemingly was like, that appears to be like one of the biggest ones nationally, at least in the United States. I don't know what happens outside of the United States, but that one, based on the indications that I've seen, is probably one of the biggest outside of, if we're counting Roswell's annual celebration.
Sure.
In that vein, that's the biggest.
Right. Yeah, I guess I was going to say, like, I don't know where else even has like a centralization like that. Cause like Pine Barrens is a place, not a singular location.
Right. I mean, I did go to the Jersey Devil one earlier this year, but it was in Asbury Park. So
what were they? What?
That one was small. So one of the things that you find is if they happen in cities, there doesn't tend to be much of an audience for it. It tends to be a much more rural phenomenon. The two places I went to were very rural. So that tends to be who is attracted and who goes to those things. Although there were a lot of people like me coming from cities.
Right. That were, believers or interested or what have you.
But yeah, there's an annual Jersey Devil Festival in Asbury Park, New Jersey as well.
Cool. Yeah, I wonder, the Mothman is such a strange one because that's similarly to Bigfoot. Like there's 8 million roads for Mothman. And
totally.
So many of them lead to Hellier and Indrid Cold and kicking a tin can and whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. That one I know less about. I know less about Mothman.
Well, again, it's Mothman is a deep, dark rabbit hole like any one of these. So you pick your poison and fall down the rabbit hole and see if you can claw your way out. Is kind of clearly
out in Chicago for a little bit too.
Yeah,
I think there were reports of him being in Chicago as well.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, Mothman's a weird one. I don't know. Is it supposed to be a real person? Like, is it a real thing? Like, I can't. I
don't think it's a person. It's a Mothman.
Right. But you know what I mean? Like, I guess everybody agrees that it exists. I guess the people that believe in it agree that it exists.
Big moth.
Yeah. What does that mean?
I mean, there's all kinds of weird cryptids. In Pennsylvania, we got the squonk.
The what?
Are you familiar with the squonk?
No.
It's a little hideous pig-like creature that cries a lot. And if you see it, it will cry itself and disappear. Like its tears will make it disappear. It's a very strange one. Very, very sad, lonely little creature.
Sounds kind of like the Puckwudgie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was when we had true crime author James Renner on a long time ago, and he was talking about the Loveland frog and the Puckwudgie. The Loveland frog's a fucking talk about weird regional crazy ass cryptids. Yeah,
you get a lot of those. So
yeah,
it's not unusual to have those.
I think those are the more interesting ones now because it's again, like Bigfoot is what Bigfoot is, but the ones that are more local, they tend to just, I think, to be again probably more easily explained away, but still interesting, just the stories and the hullabaloo surrounding it.
Right. I mean, so most of them, like, when you're saying, is it a man? Most of them don't tend to be, but one of my favorites is probably the Melonheads in Ohio and Connecticut. We've talked about the Melonheads before.
Yeah.
Where it's just like kids with encephalitis, feral children with encephalitis who run around the woods attacking people. Such a weird one. It happens in allegedly Ohio and Connecticut for some reason. I'm not sure why there's a gap, but.
And like, I would be inclined to believe that like, that's something like, I don't know what are you misidentifying that as? Like, what are you thinking that it isn't? Like, I feel like there's only one thing that could be.
How does a child survive long enough to become like a feral child?
Maybe it's like a digging up the marrow type thing. Have you seen that movie?
No.
So Adam Green, the guy who directed Hatchet, he made like a pseudo documentary with Ray Wise, who plays like a monster hunter who posits that I know Adam Green plays himself. Ray Wise plays a monster hunter who posits that there are subterranean tunnels where people who are like look different, like Harlequin babies or people who are deformed or whatever, what have you, feel comfortable living after they've been ostracized by society. And so it's called the marrow, but it's underneath. It's subterranean, but not hyper subterranean. It's that same thing where it's like again, sure, like
McMartin Cryptid Tunnel.
Do what?
Oh, sorry, I was making a joke about the McMartin tunnels. The McMartin daycare scandal with.
Yeah, that's right.
The tunnels underneath. Sorry.
Yeah, satanic panic, baby. It's coming back in a big way. That's what I want.
With cryptids.
I want full on satanic panic to come back. Put somebody in jail for listening to Metallica, please.
Oh, it's already back, man.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. It's crazy how cyclical everything is, isn't it? But not, I mean, I guess it's not really that crazy. So
No.
I guess I don't think it really, yeah. I guess if you're not paying attention, it's crazy. But the satanic panic is just QAnon, isn't it? Like they're talking about eating babies and cooking them up in pots.
I mean, that stuff never really went away. It's just people stopped paying attention. They weren't interested in following the primary players, but none of those people ever disappeared.
Yeah.
Bob Larson kept doing his thing. A lot of the evangelicals who used it in the 80s just never went away. Yeah. Jerry Falwell died, but his kid was still running Liberty University. So like all of those people are still alive. They're still doing their thing,
Just quiet. They're just not as loud as they had been.
And in fact, like a lot of the early manifestations of the satanic panic were just people trying to figure out how to make political claims or how to manage, their communities, like how to exert more control over their communities financially. And that stuff never changes to some extent. Some of the people, like one of the reasons the satanic panic initially disappeared is that Republicans swept into power in 94 with the contract with America. A lot of the evangelicals who were sort of floating on the periphery of power suddenly had it. Falwell had political power. So they didn't have to talk about Satan anymore. They could talk about, the gay agenda.
Which is the true satanic panic of our times. Careful now.
Yeah, now they're in a place where, again, for like 15, 16 years, people weren't paying attention. They sort of went out of power and now they needed to get back in. So you saw it again forming around the same time as the Tea Party. You saw a lot of stuff with like exorcisms going back up, lots of claims of Satanism again around like 2010, 2012. Obama is a secret Satanist, right? That was a thing.
Comet ping pong pizza.
Yeah, like that stuff started happening again when they needed to start making claims for political purposes. Trump got into power and it didn't last, so it needs to intensify.
I guess the question I have is how could Obama and Bush both be the Antichrist?
Yeah,
it's the same thing, point. Right? Like how many of those fucking Nostradamus things or any of that stuff is like, well, no, he's the Antichrist. No, he's the Antichrist. It's that same thing. Like, stop moving the goalposts. Stop. Just stop.
Yeah, maybe Trump is the Antichrist. Who knows?
A bunch of people just stop listening to this show. Good. I'm kidding. When you're not espousing your beliefs here on my show, Rob, where can people find you on the internet?
Most commonly on Twitter under my name at Robert Skvarla. I may have other projects coming up soon that change that, where maybe I'll do something verbally, maybe also do something visually. Who knows? We'll see.
Well, you're here from time to time, and we've done, I think this is the 5th time we've recorded together. It's
something like that.
Yeah.
Where can we find you, Chris?
weirdingwaymedia.com. That's where you can find me and 19 other shows, including this one. Not just scary stuff, more lighthearted stuff than this show. This show tends to get a little dark, which I like. That's why I do it, but movie reviews, pop culture stuff, but you can find all that at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks for that layup, by the way. Fuck, dude. Podcaster in the making.
I figured I would help you out as well.
Thank you. As for this show, ScaryStoriesWeTell.com, Scary Stories WT on all social media, but social media sucks. We all know it. I don't like interacting on it if you don't, and whatever. Just listen to the show, rate and review on iTunes. That's the best place to make an impact for this show. Rob, thank you so much for joining me as always.
Sure.
And we'll let our good friend, I don't know what else. Thank you as always. It's always fun. We got from Bigfoot to politics, but hop, skip, and a jump. Bigfoot really is he's very tangentially related to QAnon. You just don't know it yet. So it all started with him. He is Bigfoot is the original QAnoner.
Bigfoot is Q.
Bigfoot. We solved it. We can shut it down. Shut it all down. We'll let Tim White lead us out. We're done. No more podcasts.
No mystery is closed to an open mind.